Good afternoon or good morning to you, depending on where you are watching us from. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Steve Seepersod, coming to you from the campus of Binghamton University, and it's great to be back in our element with another Binghamton Learning Network webinar, part of our webinar series, which is also part of our lifelong learning initiatives here at the Alumni Association. We have so much to offer you throughout the year. We took a break for the summer from doing these webinars, but we're back at it this fall with some great programs. And at the end of this show, I'll tease what we have coming up a little bit later on in the fall, but we also have a book club, a movie club, the Tier Talk speaker series, and Homecoming is coming up soon, and we'll have a Tier Talks at Homecoming. So I'm going to pull up our website address here at the bottom of the screen, binghamton.edu/alumni, binghamton.edu/alumni. That's the place to check us out, learn more about what we have going on, and we definitely value your engagement with the university, certainly as a volunteer, event attendee, whatever that you are able to do, and you can be involved from wherever you are, which is the great part of the what the Alumni Association offers. So here we are today for a program called Therapy 101, and certainly the last 2.5 years have been taxing for us all, no matter what your circumstance is. So if you're thinking about getting help, if you've had some questions sort of chugging around in your mind and heart for a while, such as, should I seek out therapy? How do I find someone? How do I know if it's a good match? How do I tell if it's working? And how long should I give this? You are in the right place, because you will have those questions answered by the end of this hour, and certainly not a hard stop at 1 o'clock Eastern. We can hang around a little bit longer to take your questions. And this program is meant to be interactive, so we definitely want your questions. Type them in as comments on the microsite or on Facebook if you're watching us on Facebook, and we will get your questions into the mix as soon as humanly possible. So with that in mind, we will bring in our presenter for today. Here is Natasha D'Arcangelo from the class of 2001. She is a licensed mental health counselor. We have people watching us today from New York City and the Binghamton area, even as far as California, hence the good morning at the start of the show. Natasha comes to us from Florida, so happy to have her with us. She has a couple of designations. I'll just quickly read off of the sheet here. In addition to being a licensed mental health counselor, a nationally certified counselor, certified clinical trauma professional, certified compassion fatigue professional, and compassion fatigue educator. So she is happy to talk about some of the commonly asked questions by people who are in your position, considering therapy and hoping it's the right path in life for you. So Natasha, with that, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Certainly very excited to have you.
Absolutely. I'm very excited to be here. Back talking to Binghamton University folks. I had a fantastic time at Binghamton University, so very proud. Um, Thank you, everybody, so much for joining today. As Steve said, we're hoping to make this interactive. And so if you came with questions, this was the whole goal, is to give you an opportunity to get those questions answered. And I made kind of a framework of things that I most often get asked. And so I figured I would start there. But certainly, if things are coming up for you, do feel free to pop them in the chat. I'm happy to address things as they come about. Okay. The first one that I wanted to talk about is, how do I know when I need to go to therapy? I think that lots of folks are a little confused on that. And I'm biased. I think everybody needs to be in therapy, but especially if you're having something that you're struggling with. Maybe you're thinking about leaving your relationship. Maybe you're thinking about a career change. Maybe something traumatic has just happened. There's been a loss in the family, or you've just picked up and moved to a new city. Any one of those life events can be something that causes us to feel lots of discomfort, and we may need somebody to process that with. Now, I hope that those of you that are watching have a great support system, and maybe you can talk to your family about things. Maybe you can talk to your friends about things. Oftentimes, though, we hold ourselves back. We don't necessarily want those people in our lives to worry about us. And so we may not let them know how bad things are or how much we're struggling. It's also really common that we are afraid of judgment and we don't want to tell people things because then you worry, well, what are they going to think about me if they hear that I've been, feeling really sad? I'm not able to get out of bed most days. And so therapy is a perfect place for that. I usually go through about three different areas that tend to be real big warning signs for folks. And the first one is a change in your sleep patterns. If you find that you are really, really struggling with either falling asleep or staying asleep or both, and then in the mornings you're waking up just feeling completely drained, it's like you didn't get any sleep at all, and that's not typically something that happens for you, your body's trying to tell you that something is going on. And so the best thing you can do is listen to what your body is telling you. So sleep is a really big indicator. Sometimes things also swing to the other end. Super common if we're struggling with maybe either some sadness or depression, that folks will oversleep. It's an escape mechanism. And so if you're trying to not be present with those feelings, they just feel too heavy, they feel too big. Sometimes folks will sleep for 12 hours a day in an effort to escape those things. And so if that's something that you're struggling with, it's probably an indicator that you need to be talking to a professional. Changes in appetite is another huge one. And again, folks tend to fall into two major categories. Sometimes when we are very stressed out, I have lots of clients that will stop eating. They don't get hunger cues. They're not really paying attention to what's happening in their body. And so they don't eat breakfast, they don't eat lunch. And maybe sometime around 7, they're thinking to themselves, I haven't eaten anything today. And sometimes they're so anxious, it feels like there's this knot in their stomach, but they're forcing themselves to eat. Then there's folks on the other end of the spectrum that will use food as a coping skill. And so if you find that you're an emotional eater, when you're more anxious, you tend to eat more. When you're sadder, you tend to eat more. That's another indicator, especially if that comes along with an unintended change in your weight. You should most definitely be speaking to a professional. Again, your body's trying to tell you that there's something going on that needs to be addressed. Another big one is concentration. I have a lot of folks that come in and they tell me, I'm at work and I know I have to get things done. There's this deadline looming over my head and I just can't concentrate. Something that should be taking me 2 hours is taking me 6 hours. That goes also not just for work, but home. Maybe there's a TV show that you really enjoy, but you've had to restart it 5 different times. Maybe there's a book that you're interested in reading, but you're kind of staring at the page. You look up and half an hour has gone by. You have no idea what you've read, right? So concentration is another really big indicator of if there's something, again, that your body, that your system is trying to tell you, okay? Generally, I think a good rule of thumb is if you're thinking to yourself, is this something I should be talking to a therapist about? The answer is probably yes. Now, another piece of that is as a society, I think that we need to do a better job of normalizing what it looks like to talk to folks if they're struggling with your mental health. So even if this isn't you, maybe there's somebody in your circle, maybe there's somebody in your support system that's coming to you and saying, I don't know, I'm just really struggling. I've been feeling so sad, or I'm so anxious. I can't sleep at night. I don't know what to do. Now is your opportunity to say to them, have you thought about going to get some professional help? I liken it to if you had a friend that, came to you and said, I was working out last week at the gym and I don't know, I think I did something to my foot. It's super swollen, it's painful, I can't really walk on it. I don't think you would tell your friend, "Oh, it's probably all in your head." I don't think you would be dismissive of that. I don't think you would hesitate to tell your friend, "You should go get that checked out. There's probably something going on." And the same thing is true or should be true for mental health struggles. If there's somebody in your life that trusts you enough to come to you with something, it's okay to encourage them to seek out professional help. There's lots of resources out there. So that's how I would say is a good gauge of how to know when you need to go to therapy. Okay. Anything coming through yet, Steve, or will you let me know? Otherwise, I'm going to keep rolling through my FAQs.
I think we'll need to keep rolling for now, but hopefully the questions will come in. So I've been popping this graphic up from time to time. And I wanted to
Sure.
say at the beginning that if you have questions, you can also send them to me by email, and I'll have my eye on that tab on the computer here throughout the show. And I guess one question I had, and maybe this is something you'll come to a little bit later, is
Mhm.
that um, do you run into this a lot? It seems like it'd be kind of common where it's like, somebody's situation isn't super obvious where you'd want to go see a therapist, like some
Mhm.
sort of trauma or abuse or bereavement
Sure.
or some type of major life situation, but it's troublesome enough. And I feel like, it's not a big deal. I should be able to get over it on my own, or I feel like I'm the only person in the world suffering with this, but you've seen it all. And you'd say, you know, that's not reason enough to say I'm just going to go out on my own, not to trivialize whatever it is that's going on inside.
Sure, sure, absolutely. And that's another thing that I get often too, is that folks will come to me and they feel guilty, or they feel like therapy is not right for them because their problems are not bad enough. And the only gauge of that is if it's bothering you, and if you feel like you need to talk to somebody about it, then go to therapy. That's the only gauge. In the DSM is like the Bible of the therapy world. It's where the definitions of all the different mental health conditions are. And one of the most often repeated phrases in that book is clinically significant impairment. If it's bothering you enough that it's keeping you up at night, or you're having thoughts about this thing that are keep they're playing in your head and you don't want them to be playing in your head, um that's reason enough to go to therapy. So there's no gold medal for suffering. It doesn't have to be as bad as somebody else's. Somebody's always going to have it worse than you. Somebody's also always going to have it better than you. And if you're trying to fit things into some kind of checklist, what you're doing is you're invalidating your own experiences, and that's just going to make you feel worse. So that's what I would say to that. If you're even questioning it, then you probably should be talking to somebody. So then let's talk about, how do you find a therapist? Because I think this is another thing that oftentimes becomes an obstacle or a barrier for folks. The best place, I think, for most people to get started is their commercial health insurance. Because of the Affordable Care Act, mental health services now have to be covered through commercial health insurance. And so, if you're covered by Cigna, Aetna, United, whatever it is, oftentimes the practitioners are going to be listed under behavioral health services or behavioral health specialists, something with behavioral health in the title, is usually where you're going to find it. They don't oftentimes have it listed as counseling, although they might. That is going to vary from plan to plan. So every single major insurance provider is going to have a website with a list of participating providers. And so if you have commercial insurance, that's usually the best place to get started. A lot of people tend to think that therapy is not affordable for them. So start with what is affordable. You're already paying for commercial health insurance. Check to see who's a participating provider in your plan. The other great place to get started is with your employer. If you work for a large enough employer, they should offer an EAP, an employee assistance program. Take a look at those emails that you got from HR back when you started, or take a look at your benefits package. My guess is that they do offer some kind of EAP, employee assistance program. What that means is your employer will pay for you to get a certain number of therapy sessions for free. They pay for it for you. Different employers offer different things. It could be as little as 4, it could be as many as 10. That's going to vary depending on your employer. And so I'm going to ask what is usually the next question that I get, which is, I don't want to go see a therapist if my employer is going to know. Guess what? We cannot report to your employer that you are coming to see us. That is a violation of your privacy. Every time you go to the doctor's office, and it's like the first time that you're going in a year, they make you sign off on all of those HIPAA forms, right? Therapy works the same way. We are bound by HIPAA. We are bound by confidentiality rules. We cannot report to your employer that you are coming to see us. What happens is, let's say that you work for a large company. I'll just use Advent Health as an example. That's a large employer down here in Orlando where I'm located. If Advent Health offers an EAP and the employees are taking advantage of that, the only thing the therapist is allowed to report to Advent Health is how many employees are using that service. So there's no names associated with it. We'll just be able to say, in the last fiscal year, we had 12 employees come through and use the EAP program. Nothing is associated with your name. So if you've been hesitating to use your EAP because of privacy reasons, I can assure you your information will be kept confidential. If that still continues to be a concern for you, then go ahead and take a look at your commercial insurance. That's another option as well. Steve has some resources. One of them is therapyden.com. That is a fantastic website also to get started. Thank you, Steve. That's another fantastic resource to get started. They have so many different searchable things. You can search for a therapist in your zip code who's doing things in person, who's in network with your insurance company. So that's therapyden.com. It's free to use. You don't have to pay anything to use it. And that's another way that you can find a therapist in your area. Again, in my quest to make mental health care destigmatized, sometimes if you feel comfortable, I would also talk to the people in your life. Most folks that find their therapist because of a recommendation. The therapist that I've been seeing for the last couple of years was recommended to me by a friend, and she ended up being a great fit. And so that's how I found her, was through a recommendation. So have some conversations with folks in your life who you feel comfortable with, or maybe they talk about their own therapy experiences. Who are you seeing? If they're having a good experience with them, maybe you'll have a good experience with that therapist as well. So those are some of the major areas. Check with your commercial health insurance. Check to see if your employer has an EAP program, therapyden.com, and then check in with your circle. If there's anybody that you know that's talking to a therapist, who are they talking to? Okay, that would be another one. Okay, next one that I had down on my list is, how long do I have to be in therapy? And there is no magic answer to that. It very much varies for different people. Most times, folks come to me in crisis. They come to me because maybe there's been I specialize in trauma. So lots of folks come to me with a background of trauma. And maybe they've been doing well up until the most recent thing happened. And now everything just feels overwhelming and they're not able to cope with it. So, how long you are going to be in therapy is very much dependent on your particular situation. You could need maybe 6 sessions and you feel better. You talked it out, you got some great coping skills, and you now feel equipped to go out and tackle things on your own. If you have an extensive history of trauma, you may be in therapy for a little bit longer. Um, so that is a very individual question. The overall feeling, though, is that you should be moving towards feeling better. You should be moving towards feeling less anxious or less depressed, or have higher quality of life on a day-to-day basis. So there's no right answer as to how long you need to be in therapy. Most times, I will start clients out with once a week sessions for the first month. Hopefully, by that time, they've gotten some good coping skills under their belt that they're now using on a day to day basis. And then I'll drop down frequency of sessions to every 2 weeks. And then we can drop down to every 3 weeks. And then we can drop down to once a month. And then maybe we'll do once a month for 2 months, 3 months, really depends on the situation. And at that point, they're probably okay to go out and continue living their lives. I tend to do a check-in at this point with my therapist every few months, just to kind of catch her up on stuff, maybe talk through some things that I've been struggling with and just needed a different perspective on. So that is a very individual situation. What's a good thing to ask yourself though is this helping? Am I continuing to feel better? Because if it doesn't feel like it's helping and you're not feeling like you're getting better, it may be time for a change. Maybe a change in therapist, maybe a change in approach or modality. And that's a conversation you should be able to have with your therapist. So there's no right answer to how long you need to be in therapy. It very much depends on your situation. Sometimes folks will come to me, we do a good amount of work on some of the childhood trauma. They've got some good coping skills. They go out, they're living their lives, and then something happens. And so maybe they come back to me a year later, or they come back to me a couple years later, just to process through whatever new thing has popped up for them. That's not uncommon either. So that's the answer to how long will you need to be in therapy. That all depends on you and your own situation. No right answer to that.
This may be a crazy question to follow up on that, but is there almost a too long? Let's just say somebody goes for a year, and maybe not a year with a once a week frequency, but a
Mhm.
year. And is it a case of the person's not really trying hard to make progress, or the therapist should be doing something different, to try to cut them loose, or maybe the person's it is a scary thing to think about after a while if I'm going to
Yeah.
fly on my own and make it work, and
Yeah.
yes, you can always come back,
Sure.
but is there a too long in a situation like that?
Yeah, and I'm so glad you asked that, Steve, because I think that different therapists are going to have different answers to this one. But in my opinion, yes, there is a too long to be in therapy. I tell clients right at the very beginning, my goal is to put myself out of a job. I want you to not have to come and see me anymore because we've worked through what you needed to work through and you've learned enough coping skills that you can go out and you can live a higher quality of life. That's why I do what I do, because I want to help people get to the point where they don't need to come and see me anymore, right? And so I have had clients in the past, well, and honestly, currently, who have seen other therapists and maybe they saw that therapist for a year. Again, not necessarily at that week frequency, but if you're leaving your therapist's office every time and you feel worse, or you feel like your therapist is judging you, or you feel like you're not getting anything out of it, it's okay to make a change. It's okay to communicate that to your therapist. And if you don't feel safe communicating that to your therapist, my answer to that is that that's probably not a good therapeutic relationship. And maybe you need to talk to somebody else to see if they're a better fit for you. Um, that actually kind of gets into one of the questions that I wanted to answer today, which is how do I know if I found the right therapist, right? There have been a number of studies conducted on therapy. And what every single study has found is that it does not matter how many years of experience your therapist has. It does not matter the kinds of trainings and certification that your therapist has. It does not matter the level of education that your therapist has, whether that's a master's degree or a doctorate degree. What matters the most for predicting the success of therapy is the relationship between you and your therapist. You should feel comfortable to talk to your therapist. You should feel like it's a non judgmental space. You should feel like you can talk about any of the things that you want to talk about. If I have a client coming to me saying, I feel kind of frustrated, I've been seeing you for a month now, and honestly, I'm just not feeling better, right? As a therapist, I shouldn't be getting defensive about that. I should be saying, okay, well, thank you so much for bringing that to me. Let's revisit your goals that you set up in the beginning. Maybe we're working on the wrong things. Um, Maybe there's a different technique or approach that I need to be using. Or maybe there's another clinician that's a better fit for you. Those should be open conversations that should be having. If you're scared to talk to your therapist about something, my guess is that there's something going on with that therapeutic relationship that's not beneficial for you. It doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong. Now, I will say part of therapy also is sometimes we're going to ask you to do things that feel uncomfortable for you. If, for example, I have a client that comes to me and they have social anxiety, right? Probably at some point, I am going to recommend to that client, I want you to, the next time you go to the grocery store, try to strike up a conversation with the cashier. That's probably going to make them uncomfortable because of their social anxiety. But if we're not pushing through some of that discomfort, are you getting to a better place? Probably not, right? It should never, though, feel like something that is unaccomplishable, right? It should never feel like something that we're forcing you to do. And it also shouldn't be punitive. So if I have a client come back to me the next time and I say, well, we set a goal that you were going to try to talk to the cashier next time you went to the grocery store. How did that go for you? If you say, I didn't do it, I shouldn't be responding to you with anger and saying, oh, well, what's wrong with you? You're never going to get better or anything like that. I should say something like, okay, well, tell me about it. What happened? Did you try? Did you end up not being able to go into the grocery store at all? What was happening? And we should process through that situation. That's another opportunity for learning. So how do you know if you found the right therapist? It's you feel comfortable. Sometimes it takes a few sessions to really get a good feel for that. It should also feel like a collaborative process. I'm never going to know you the way that you know you. You are the expert on yourself. I'm just here to maybe help facilitate some insights into things that you haven't thought about. I'm here to offer you a different kind of perspective on things. So, your therapist really shouldn't be, I am the all knowing expert and I know all of the things. It should be more of a collaborative process. Have you thought about it this way? Or, it sounds like maybe you used some harsher words that you were intending, with your kids in that particular situation. If that comes up again, let's talk through some other opportunities. What are some other ways that you might be able to talk to your kids if you're frustrated in a moment like that? It should be more of a collaborative process. It shouldn't be your therapist, dictating to you or telling you the things to do. Okay. Kind of going along with that. The other thing that goes along with finding the right therapist is sometimes we feel better, and this was the other website that Steve had up on that resource slide. Sometimes we feel better if we go, thanks, Steve, if we go to a therapist that has something in common with us. And so I just wrote an article called As a Brown Therapist, Here Are the 6 Things I Want You to Know About Therapy. And one of the items in that article is that therapists are like rainbows. We come in all different colors. And so you may want a therapist who is the same gender as you. You may want a therapist who is the same ethnicity or race as you are. And the American Counseling Association has put together this fantastic resource site where it's a nice launch pad for I'm looking for a Black therapist, or I'm looking for a Jewish therapist, or I'm looking for a queer therapist. There are trans therapists out there. There are non-binary therapists out there. And so sometimes one of the things that helps to establish a really nice therapeutic alliance is if you have something in common with that therapist. It's a great way to try to establish, again, that relationship where you feel comfortable with your therapist. And it's okay if that's something that you're looking for. It doesn't mean that that's not a valid thing to be requesting, or that's not a valid thing to be looking for in a therapist. Some of my favorite clients to work with are clients that are first generation American. I am first generation American. I am the child of immigrant parents. And so I know what it's like to be not American enough to be American, but not Guyanese enough to be Guyanese, right? And so, if that's something that you want to share with your therapist, that is absolutely okay. And there are options out there for you to be able to find a therapist that you have those kinds of things in common with. Um, Again, it's another one of those things that's going to help therapy be successful for you. Okay. I'll pause here, Steve, just to give you an opportunity. Yeah.
Sure, I've been putting the graphic up and eagerly awaiting questions, so do send them. And
Okay.
we want this to be as interactive as possible.
Yes.
One question I have, and maybe this is on the minds of some people watching, is what to expect from that initial session. Because you liken it to I have a physical ailment and I want to get in and I want to heal as quick as possible. So
Yes.
you could come into the session for the first time and right from the jump just want to get to the issues, but
Mhm.
the clinician has a set of processes they have to follow before you can get into the meat of the thing to make it the best process for everyone on both sides.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for asking, Steve. Another fantastic question. So, you've contacted your commercial insurance, you found somebody that's in network, you pulled up their website, and you're like, yes, this seems like a good fit. They seem like that I'm going to match with them. Also, side note, some therapists will do a free 10 or 15-minute consultation. So you can talk to them even before that initial appointment just to get an idea of their personality, if it feels like something that's going to be a good fit for you. And another thing that I did forget to mention that I want to mention here is most therapists have some kind of specialization. So there are therapists that specialize in working with children. There are therapists that specialize in substance abuse, in postpartum issues, in families, in couples, in trauma, right? I do a lot of trauma work. There are therapists that specialize in grief. So the therapists that specialize in working with first generation American clients. I mean, you name it, there's a specialization for it. I get about 15 emails a day of different continuing education classes I can do for different specialties that I can have. So, if you're a professional who's recently been diagnosed with ADHD, for example, I guarantee you can find a therapist that specializes in helping professionals with ADHD. So, just another thing to keep in mind when you're searching for that person is look at what their specializations are. Okay. Okay, sorry. I forgot to mention that when I was answering the first question. So, as far as that first session, what's going to happen? What are the expectations? Your first session with a clinician is going to be an intake. They're going to send you some forms ahead of time, or maybe they will have you fill them out if you're seeing them in person when you're there in the office. They're going to ask you things like, how have you been sleeping? How have you been eating? How's your concentration been? Have you ever seen a mental health professional before? So in the intake question is where we really get to, excuse me, get a good idea of what brings you to us now. Maybe you finally got what you thought was your dream job and you've been working towards this for years. And now you have what your dream job and you don't like it and it wasn't what you thought it was going to be. So we're going to ask you questions like what kind of symptoms have you been experiencing? Have you been really sad about that? Have you been worrying about things? Are you also struggling with some irritability? I always ask about sleep. I ask about concentration. I ask about your appetite. I ask, have you ever seen a mental health professional before? Have you ever been hospitalized for mental health reasons? Are you having suicidal thoughts? Have you ever struggled with suicidal thoughts? Have you ever attempted to take your own life? I'm going to ask you about substance use. Tell me what your current alcohol intake looks like. Are you using other substances? Have you ever abused any substances, needed AA, NA, or rehab? I'm going to ask you about your family history. Has anybody else in your family ever been diagnosed with any kind of mental health conditions? Are you in a romantic relationship? Tell me a little bit about your relationship with your partner. Do you have any children? How's your relationship with your kids? Um, I'm going to ask about things like what sounds like some of what you're describing is anxiety. How long do you feel like this has been going on? Sometimes people will tell me, I don't ever remember not being anxious. That's sometimes an answer that I get. I'll ask you about work. How's work going? Is that an area of stress for you? I'll ask you what's going well. What's been helping you to cope with all of this stuff before you came to me? And then at least in my opinion, in that first session, in that intake, you and I should be setting up some goals together. What do you want to work on? What do you want this time to be about? How will you know if it's working? What's going to change for you? Um, some of the most common answers that I get to that is, I want to feel more motivated, or I want to have more days where I'm feeling happier, or I want to be able to, fall asleep more easily at night because I don't have these thoughts playing in my head, or, I don't think I ever processed through the grief of my grandfather dying. And so I need to talk to somebody about that. Or I had lots of stuff happen to me in my childhood, and I've never talked to anybody about that. And I think that I need to. So you should be setting goals with your therapist. That should be a collaborative process. And then it's okay in that session for you to be asking your therapist questions. In the entire time I've been doing this, I only ever had one client ask me why I became a therapist. It's okay for you to ask us questions. What's your background in this? Where did you get your degree from? You say that you specialize in trauma. What does that mean? What kind of trainings have you received? What do you do now for continuing education? It's okay for you to be asking your therapist those kinds of questions, right? If they're more personal questions, most therapists will not answer them. We're not here for me, we're here for you. But it's okay for you to be asking about things like that, if you're coming in with something like, for example, I don't treat folks with eating disorders. That's not something that I have been trained to do. And so if I have somebody come in and, we didn't do a consultation, but they're coming in and they're telling me, I don't know, I think I might have anorexia, right? Ethically, I'm going to say to you, okay, I'm going to do my intake with you today. You already signed up for it. We already, did everything that we needed to with the insurance. Here's a list of referrals for clinicians in the area that specialize in eating disorders. That is not something that is within my scope of practice, right? I don't have a specialization in treating folks with an eating disorder. But here are some fantastic clinicians that I know in the area that are good at that. So that's another thing that can potentially be part of your intake is it may end up needing to be a referral to somebody else that really does specialize in whatever the presenting problem is. That's something that your therapist should have, is a network of other clinicians that have different specializations, because we cannot specialize in all of the things. That's not something that we do.
I'm curious how many times you've seen in your therapy where somebody comes in for what they think is the problem that needs to be treated, only to
Mhm.
find it's something else completely different, that it could be an unresolved conflict from 20, 30 years ago. They
Sure.
thought they were over it, and then it's causing these same patterns in the present day that lead to them feeling bad.
Absolutely. Yes. And again, spot on question, Steve. I would say probably, I don't know, 90% of the time, what folks think they're coming to therapy for is not actually what they're coming to therapy for. So that example that I made up with this person who got their promotion, right? They got the dream job, but it still doesn't feel quite right. Because I do see so many folks with trauma, that's something that I am passionate about. Um, I'm always going to assess for a history of trauma. I'm going to assess for a history of grief issues. Because, in my opinion, most things trace back to some kind of trauma. And so, usually, whatever you think you're coming in for is not actually the root of the problem. And there are some therapists who use a modality called solution focused therapy, where they don't necessarily go all the way back, right? They may not go back to some of that childhood stuff. That's entirely up to you. You may respond better to that than going back to some of that childhood stuff. But it is very, very common that what you think you're coming in for is actually attributed to some unresolved stuff that you thought you got over. I do not like those words, but they're coming back to haunt you in the present day. The truth is there's this huge misconception out there that if something happens to us when we're 8 years old, for example, and I don't know why it is this way, but people think that if it happened to you a certain amount of time ago, that you should get over it. And that's just simply not true. That's not how our nervous systems work. Let's say that there was a child who got bitten by a dog at the age of 8. That child would very likely have a fear of dogs potentially for the rest of their lives if they didn't get any treatment for that, right? And I don't think we would look down on that person or we would question the validity of their feelings. The same thing is true for physical abuse. The same thing is true for emotional abuse, right? Just because it happened when you were 8 doesn't mean it's not still leaving a long lasting impact on you. There's a great book called The Body Keeps the Score. And what we know based on years of scientific evidence, scientific research, is that your nervous system holds on to those traumas. It's not a conscious process, but it continues to live on in your system. And oftentimes that's what's impacting the way that you respond to your romantic partner when there's some kind of disagreement. It may be impacting why you're jumping from job to job and you can't seem to keep a job for longer than 3 months. It may be even impacting some physical stuff. I can't tell you the number of clients who have come to me with just general GI distress, and they've had endoscopies and they've had colonoscopies and they've been to GI specialists, and there's no real biological reason for the GI issues. And so then they come to me because they're like, well, we've ruled everything else out, and so my GI specialist told me I should talk to a therapist. Right? It continues to live on in our bodies, and that's not something that should be stigmatized. It doesn't make you broken. It doesn't make you defective. It means that you're human, and your nervous system just needs a little bit of assistance with processing some of the things that happen to you. It's a great question.
Thank you. And certainly, we have about a little bit less than 20 minutes left. And if you have questions, certainly get these in through the comments on Facebook or by email. Left my email address up here. But we can roll on and keep going. And I know Natasha's got some questions, and the material you bring up certainly sparks some great questions
Sure.
that I like to throw in from time to time. And one of them would be, on a session-to-session basis, what should I be looking for the therapist to do? It should be something more, I would think, than I lay down on the sofa and I tell you how the last 1 or 2 weeks was, and then here's
Yes.
$90 and I see you to book the next appointment.
Yeah, exactly. And then fantastic thinking, Steve, because that was actually the next question that I was going to answer. So behind me, this is actually the couch that used to be in my office when I was still seeing folks in person before I switched to telehealth. But and nobody ever laid down on the couch. They sat on the couch. But I think that a lot of therapy, there's like a lot of mystery about it. We don't actually know what happens in a therapy session. So let's demystify that a little bit. I think that there's a conception out there that we have the answers, right? So you go to a therapist because the therapist knows the things and they're going to tell you what to do. And then you do what the therapist does, and then everything's great. That's not how therapy works. As I mentioned earlier, you are the expert in your life. You know you better than I'm ever going to know you. It is not my job to tell you what to do because I am not the expert on your life, right? I can help you talk through things. Let's say, for example, I have some clients right now who are thinking about leaving their jobs, right? I can't tell you whether or not you should leave your job. I can help you process through, well, let's say that you go ahead and quit tomorrow. What would that look like for you? Do you have savings? Are you going to be able to pay rent next month? Are things so bad that you need to quit because of your mental health? What's the backup plan? Are there any pros to staying? So I'm here to help you get a different perspective on it, right? Sometimes I help clients who've got some medical things going on, and we may work together in session to put together a list of questions for them to ask their doctor, right? So, what a therapy session should look like is, it really depends on session to session, but it should be something related to those goals that you set up in the beginning. It shouldn't just be, and I love that example you gave, Steve. It shouldn't just be, I come in, I tell you what happened in the next 2 weeks, I pay you my money, and I see you, I see you in another 2 weeks, right? It should be, okay, John Smith, when you and I first saw each other for the intake session, we set as one of your goals that you really wanted to work through the grief over, losing your grandmother last year. Right. So I'm going to check in. How has your mood generally been? Have you been having any suicidal thoughts? Okay, great. So let's go ahead and do some grief work today. Now, of course, if there is something pressing that has happened, if there was some kind of crisis at work or some kind of crisis within the family, of course you're going to be able to talk about that. But generally, you should be focusing on those goals that you set up. And those goals are not written in stone. Ideally, you're attaining those goals. You're feeling happier day to day. You feel like you've attained a higher quality of life. You're not feeling as anxious. You're not feeling as depressed. And so we'll continue to rework those goals, but that's really what you should be focusing on. The other piece of things is, and this is why the specialization is so important, because I've gotten extra training in being able to help folks that have a history of trauma. I'm going to use some of those therapeutic modalities to help you process that trauma. It's not just you sitting in session, telling me about all the things that's ever happened since you were 5. Right? There should be a purpose for that. We should have some good coping skills in place. You should be able to ground yourself before you talk through any of the traumas, so that I'm not further re-traumatizing you, right? Same thing with grief. I need you to be able to be comfortable in your body and not be in a body that's in panic mode before we can process through any of that grief. So my job falls into a few major categories. Sometimes for folks, being able to get to a therapist, and there's not a week that goes by that I don't hear, well, I've never told anybody this before, but, and then whatever it is comes out. So it's a place for you to go to talk about those things that you've never been able to process through before. The other thing is, because your therapist is not a part of your everyday life, they're able to maintain a certain level of objectivity. You and I aren't going to be sitting across from the dinner table tonight. So if you tell me that thing that nobody else in your life knows about, you don't have to worry that it's going to get out, that I'm going to tell anybody. I'm an objective third party. And so if you're describing to me a conversation that you had with your significant other, I can say to you something like, well, you told me that you're working to get to a better place with your partner. And it sounds like some harsh language was used. I don't think most people would respond well to you calling them stupid. I'm just making up an example. And so I'm not quite seeing how using that kind of language with your partner would help you get to a better place with them, right? So it's that objectivity plays a really important part. I can't therapize my friends and my family. I'm too close to the situation to remain objective. And then thirdly, coping skills, right? So if you feel a panic attack going on, we should be working on some coping skills to help you get to a better place with that panic attack. If you're feeling overwhelmed with the grief because you've recently had a significant loss, we should be working on coping skills to help you get to a better place with the grief. So every therapy session is going to look a little bit different, but they should be based on those goals that you and your therapist worked together to create, that you revisit every so often, adjust as you need to. And what that looks like from session to session may be different. And this is why it's important for you to ask in the intake, well, what kind of trainings have you received? What kind of modalities do you use, right? I don't expect that clients come in and know the difference between CBT and ART and EMDR. My field is an entire alphabet soup. But you should be able to ask me, what do those letters behind your name mean? I don't know what any of that means. So you're a certified clinical trauma professional. What does that mean? You should be able to ask your therapist those questions. And again, it's another great reason to do some research ahead of time to figure out what their specializations are.
I have just a couple of quick housekeeping things. One is we put up that slide a couple of minutes ago that had the helpful links. If you're watching on the microsite, the links are posted there because it's not the easiest thing to jot it down quickly before I take it down. So you will find it there if you need to navigate through to those websites. I'm also going to put those links within the comments on Facebook. So if you're watching there, the links will be coming your way. And we do have some audience questions. So I'll get to
Right.
the first one. Do you think it is important for the sessions to be in person, or can virtual work well too?
Well, I'll tell you this. I was 100% in person before March of 2020. And I never thought that I was going to be a telehealth therapist. And what I found is it can be just as effective. That's a very personal question. Sometimes people do better in person. I will say, for convenience's sake, telehealth has really opened up therapy to lots of folks that otherwise would not have been able to access the services. You got to leave work early, you got to drive over to your therapist's office, you got to find somebody that has evening availability or weekend availability. Whereas now, I have plenty of folks who they take their lunch break, they sit in their car at work, and we do a session and then they go right back to work. So I think for convenience's sake, telehealth can be just as effective. I also think it depends on the severity of issues. So, if I've got a client who's really struggling, they're really suicidal, maybe they were just released from an inpatient hospital a week ago, and they had like a 3-week long inpatient stay, probably not the best fit for teletherapy. I'm probably going to give them the names of some clinicians that I know that are doing in-person work. Um, Substance abuse counseling tends to do better in person. So certain things I think are better suited to doing in-person sessions. But I really do think that a lot of things can be addressed just as effectively through telehealth. So great question.
Here's another question. What is expected from the patient client during therapy, especially during the first session or sessions? Are there red flags or indicators that a therapist is just not compatible?
Oh, great question. So there were a couple of ones in there. So red flags that I would look out for are, if you feel uncomfortable, if you feel like your therapist is judging you, if you feel like your therapist um is not like equipped to handle whatever you're coming to them with. So and again, this is why it's important to ask them, have you been trained on working with clients with eating disorders? That's a very valid question for you to ask. And if they say no, part of my code of ethics, the American Counseling Association has a code of ethics. We're only supposed to practice within our scope of practice. The other thing is if I have not been trained in a modality, I cannot represent myself as somebody that's been trained in that modality. So for example, I don't know if folks can see in the background, but I've got my pride flag up and my HRC a sticker up. So I consider myself an ally of the LGBTQIA plus community. And if you are under that umbrella and you are sitting in front of a therapist and maybe you're not coming in with a presenting issue that has anything to do with being part of that community, but if your therapist is making statements that feel homophobic or feel transphobic, run in the other direction, and find a therapist that is either part of that community or is a very obvious ally. I mean, I put those things within camera view I put my pronouns behind my name because I want to communicate right from the outset. This should be a safe place for you. If it feels like your therapist is kind of dictating to you and, well, that was wrong. I don't understand why you did that. I would consider that a red flag. I mean, your life is yours to live. And sometimes I do have clients that come in and they say, "Well, you're going to be disappointed in me." And I'll say, "I'm probably not going to be disappointed in you. What happened?" Well, I know we talked about me talking to that cashier at the grocery store. But I didn't feel up to it. Now, they should be responding with something like, "Well, that's okay. Like, I can't believe that you did that. You're wasting my time." It should be more of a, well, what was going on? Because obviously the homework was on your mind. What do you think got in your way? It should be more of a understanding that you're a human. And even if we set a homework assignment, maybe you didn't get to it. Now, the caveat to that is if we're, 3 months in and you still haven't talked to the cashier at the grocery store, I'm probably going to push back a little bit harder on you and say something like, remember we set a goal in the beginning as you really wanted to work on your social anxiety. And I know that you've been feeling super anxious, but you still haven't completed that homework assignment. So am I helping you? Because if this is not helpful to you, I want to make sure that you're finding a place that is more helpful to you. How can I help you be able to attain that goal? And maybe it's something like, well, can you be on the phone with me when I'm at the grocery store? Or, it should be more of a collaborative process, right? But it shouldn't feel like your therapist is judging you or dictating to you, or you're like scared to tell them things. I would say all those different things are red flags. Yeah.
Here's another question. I was going to ask something about this, and I'm glad this came in. I am curious if we can speak more about couples therapy, how to effectively find a therapist, how to ensure sessions do more good than harm, how to frame the approach to ensure the sessions offer skills building that can be carried into life. How can we ensure therapy does not pit partners against each other, but instead supports them working as a team?
Oh, fantastic question. So, as you can probably tell, I do not specialize in couples therapy. That's not something that I do. So, you want to look for somebody that has the designation LMFT. That would be a licensed marriage and family therapist. Those are folks who, in their graduate program, as well as during their internship hours, specialized in working with families and counselors. Now, that's not to say that licensed mental health counselors, licensed clinical social workers, and psychologists also cannot specialize in couples work. But if you're struggling with where to even start looking for somebody, looking for an LMFT, a licensed marriage and family therapist, is a good place to get started. This is another specialization area that I would look into, and that it's okay for you to ask the therapist about. Some of the two main modalities for effective couples work are a therapist that specializes and has gotten training in the Gottman method. That's Gottman. If they are a Gottman trained therapist, that means they have invested time and money in learning how to work with couples using that particular modality. That's one of the most widely accepted modalities for working with couples. The other one is EFT. By Dr. Sue Johnson. I want to say it stands for the Emotional Freedom Technique, but don't quote me on that. But it is Dr. Sue Johnson. Side note, fantastic resource is a book written by her called Hold Me Tight, 7 Conversations for a Lifetime of Love. That's the other really widely accepted couples modality. There are other ones out there. Those are the two ones that come to mind. Please do keep in mind, I do not specialize in working with couples. You should find somebody that both of you feel comfortable for. If it feels like they are taking one side against the other, that is not the right couples counselor for you. Okay. That couples counselor should be essentially a mediator. so that both of you learn effective communication skills for being able to say what you need to say to each other in a way that each of you can hear your partner without getting to a super angry and defensive place. They should be giving you things to work on outside of session. Um, different skills to practice, such as using empathy with each other, practicing I statements, some kind of conflict resolution skills. Okay. Sometimes there's things that you need to work on individually in order for couples counseling to be effective, right? Sometimes I remember I only ever see one half of the couple. And so, if I have a client who really struggles with taking accountability for their own actions, that's going to make couples counseling more difficult because they're just going to want to blame their partner. And so the couples counselor should be able to say to them, well, XYZ thing happened. And so here is how that was perceived by your partner. Can you see how you played a role in this? That doesn't mean that they're attacking you. They're trying to bring your attention to how you played a role in this as well. So it should be somebody that both of you feel comfortable with. Okay. There are some therapists who will do an individual session with you and your partner before they see you together as a couple. Okay. So that's another possibility out there too. But I would look for somebody trained in Gottman or an EFT. Yeah. Or look for an LMFT.
Here's another audience question. Would you recommend Psychology Today as a reference for finding a therapist? It's a
Oh,
good
sure.
question because that comes up high on Google searches.
Yeah, so Psychology Today is another great resource. I prefer Therapy Den because as a clinician that's been listed on both Psychology Today and Therapy Den, Psychology Today, you have to pay as a therapist to have your profile on there, and also you're limited to just 3 paragraphs to be able to describe yourself. The Psychology Today also has I don't know if things have gotten better since I left the platform. They have struggled in the past with accusations of racism. Whenever I got the magazine that came out every month, and clinicians have said to them, we need to be introducing more wide perspectives, and Psychology Today governing body was ignoring those things. And so that's why I prefer recommending Therapy Den. As a therapist, it is free for me to have my profile on Therapy Den. I can talk about the social justice work that I do. I can talk about being an ally of the LGBTQIA plus community. It gives me a lot more room to actually build out a profile that when a client looks at it can really get an idea of who I am and where I stand. And Psychology Today doesn't give you as much of an opportunity to do that, but it is certainly a resource that you absolutely can use for sure. Mhm.
And before we wrap up, should we say a couple of things about privacy? Because a little while ago, you were saying that people should feel comfortable to share whatever with you because you're not in their everyday life and your circles only intersect when you come into therapy. And so it's not like you've got to see this person out in the world and have to interact and have it be awkward. But anything that's told you has to be kept private also. So there should be, and I know it's covered in the intake and there's the privacy
Mhm.
policy and things like that. But can you speak to that briefly just to
Yes.
close us out?
Absolutely, Steve. Thank you for asking. That was one of the ones I wanted to address today. So I will say in my intake session, everything that you share with me stays between us, with the exceptions of if you tell me that you are planning on hurting yourself, if you tell me that you are planning on hurting somebody else, if you tell me about child abuse, elderly abuse, or abuse of a disabled adult, your therapist is a mandated reporter. We have to report those things. And also in the case of a court order. So a judge's subpoena can overrule things, privacy as well. So those are the exceptions to confidentiality. I've had it happen before where I had a client who missed an appointment. She called me, told me that she had stopped taking her medication, was really struggling with suicidal thoughts, and did not feel safe in her own home. I called 911 because that person was not in my office. And so I sent the police out to do a wellness check. So that is a situation where I will break confidentiality because I was worried for her safety. Okay. So those are situations where we will break confidentiality if we're worried about you hurting yourself, somebody else, or if there's abuse involved. Those are some of the situations. Now, I will say, Steve, I have run into clients in public before. So that is a thing that I also like to address in the intake if I am in the same general geographic area. Um, Again, my foundation is that I am here to respect your privacy. And so if I see a client out there in the real world, who knows whatever situation, maybe it's like a restaurant or movie theater or something. I will not say anything to you. I will not approach you. I will pretend like I do not see you. And so, if you and your therapist are in the same geographic area, that's a valid question to ask them. What if I run into you at a restaurant somewhere? What do we do? I'm not going to say anything to you. Right now, if I have a client come up and say something to me, I will say hi, but I am not going to initiate that conversation. And I am certainly not going to divulge that I know you because you're my client. That is not my business to tell. So, yeah.
Could be just a wink and a nod, and you go your way and I go mine, and we play it cool because yeah, it
Mhm.
is. It could be a sticky situation out in
Yes.
public like that,
And
and
if you
yeah.
live in a more rural area, that's a valid conversation to have with your therapist. There's only one grocery store in town, or how do we avoid each other? That's absolutely a conversation to have. Again, I live in Orlando. So it's only happened to me a couple of times, but I try to address that right there in the intake. I will not come up to you. I will not violate your privacy like that. Nope.
Well, it was a very fast hour
Yes.
and super interesting, and hopefully we got to most of the questions, and I'm glad we
Yeah.
had some audience questions mixed in, and certainly a very easy topic to fill the hour. Natasha,
Mhm.
thank you so much for the
Thank you
generosity of
so
your
much for
time and
having
for
me.
answering our call for speakers. And I'll put my email up. If you think that you would like to be a featured speaker at a future webinar, certainly feel free to reach out to me and we can have a conversation about it. And certainly almost any topic will be considered. We know we have a lot of alumni with expertise, and we like to share that expertise with people in the alumni community. And so we had put a call out on LinkedIn a while back, and Natasha answered, and we're very thankful that she did because just super easy to talk to. I felt like almost in that initial conversation planning the webinar was like it kind of was starting to drift into therapy for me. I'm like, it's not really intended to be that, but I can see that your clients probably like you a lot, and so
Thank
we're
you.
very
Thank you so
thankful that
much.
you shared your time with us,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
hopefully we had something that really was helpful for those who are watching because. We know people are struggling, COVID or not COVID, but certainly two and a
Absolutely.
half years since COVID, a lot has been going on. It just has
Yeah.
a way of eventually, if it hadn't in the beginning, just
It's
emotionally just
gonna catch up
getting
with
at
you.
people. So,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
thank you very much.
And folks can feel free to reach out to me too if you had something that you didn't feel comfortable asking in a large group. Natasha Darkangelo at Gmail. As sometimes I have folks reach out to me afterwards. Just no like private information that's not a HIPAA protected email. But if there's a website or a book that I mentioned and it went by too quickly, do feel free to contact me afterwards. I don't have a problem with that.
Thank you so much. And before we go, I just want to tease a couple of programs that are coming up. We have homecoming taking place here on campus October 7th to the 9th, Friday through Sunday. That will be here very, very soon. We're excited about what will be a great homecoming weekend. So let me pull back to the website address for the Alumni Association. You can find the homecoming website through there, or it's also homecoming.binghamton.edu. Very, very easy to find. And we are taking registrations for homecoming. Please come and join us. It's always a good time, and you will certainly be very, very happy that you did. And we have a few programs coming up as part of the Binghamton Learning Network. During homecoming weekend on Saturday, October 8th, we're going to have the program Decision 2022, a critical look at the midterm election. This is going to be part of the Tier Talk speaker series. This is not a webinar, although a recording will be posted after for viewing, but this is a live in-person program, and all the events at homecoming are live and in person. And that's going to be October 8th at noon, or excuse me, October 8th at 11, from 11 to noon June in C4. So if you're coming to campus for homecoming, please come to the Tier Talk. If you are planning to come to homecoming, or if you haven't made your plans yet, make plans to come, and we'll certainly look forward to seeing you here at homecoming. Two webinars coming up a little bit later in the fall. One is going to be October 25th with a 10 a.m. start times. This is a little bit earlier than we normally have, where usually we're in the noon Eastern hour. This is going to be at 10 with Brian Stahl from the class of 11. Broadway on a budget. So if you're looking to go to a Broadway show and don't want to spend a lot of money, Brian is the expert on finding tickets at less than $60 per piece. And he's seen hundreds of shows, including Hamilton, at these bargain rate prices, and is happy to talk about all things Broadway and how you can take advantage of these special deals. So definitely want to join us for that. And on November 9th, we're back in the noon hour for a program called The Evolution of Cannabis. Cannabis is certainly something we're hearing a lot about as this business has evolved and changed very, very quickly with legislation changing in New York and pretty much every other state, and big business around cannabis. Neil Kaufman from the class of 81, an attorney who is a super expert in this area, is going to be our featured speaker, and that program is coming up November 9th. And so before I go, I had said thank you to Natasha, and we certainly are very appreciative of her time and expertise. I just want to say thank you to Jen Gabriel, who's been behind the scenes working with us on the program today, and certainly very grateful for her assistance and a big help to our programs here on the Binghamton Learning Network. So for Jen, Natasha, I'm Steve Seepersod. Have a great day, and we'll see you at our next program.